It's now my pleasure, just before we break, to introduce Malcolm Preston. He is a partner at PwC, but even more than that, he is the global leader of their sustainability and climate change practice, which I have to say I was stunned to learn has 800 people in that practice. So when we talk about bringing these kinds of issues and changes to scale at large corporations, it's groups like PwC that have the scale to do this. And I know from quite a bit of time with Malcolm that he is indeed a committed leader of this practice, that this is something that is not just about the workday for him, but that is his passion and mission. And so I'd like to invite Malcolm Preston to come up.
Thanks very much, Mark. I have literally 10 minutes, so I'm going to be very, very quick. I could just ask, if you haven't booked into your pigeonholes, if you could do, because in about 5 minutes' time we're going to do a quick poll. So we haven't got long, so if you're already logged in, that will be great. What I'd like to do is take it back up a bit, because of course at PwC, we're a firm of accountants, right? My team actually isn't accountants, we're academics, we're scientists, we're economists, but we do like to measure stuff. And a lot of what's been talked about over the last 2 days has been around strategy, it's been around some really good debate just now about the role of philanthropy versus the corporate. But there still need to be tools, there need to be things that business people can actually identify with and use. So we've been working very hard on what are those tools, what are the things that are already available, what needs to be developed that business leaders can use. So I want to just talk quickly about the role of business in society and what tools are out there. Right, now we all get that everybody is really looking for these two things, right? We're looking for a thriving society in a thriving environment. That's sort of the Brundtland description of just sustainability, if you boil it right down. And there are two key drivers to what can make or break that ambition. And those are governments, and the policies they set, and it's business and the impact they can have. And most people sort of get that, and we've had a lot of people talking about these two broad elements of society that drive what happens in society. Now, if we just look at the government side, they set policy and regulation which affects society and however they do it. And up till now, they've used GDP as their sort of blunt tool for measuring how well they're doing. And we all know GDP isn't really the answer. There are now broader tools coming on. Michael Porter yesterday referred to something called Beyond GDP. There's GDP Plus, there's the WAVES program, there's the SEEA, there's a whole series of things. Michael Porter is also himself working on something called the Social Progress Index, which is a phenomenal piece of work. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you have a look at it. It measures the way all the countries of the world are achieving social progress outside of GDP. And then there's another wonderful thing which I've come across called the Earth Security Index, which country by country by country identifies what are the big issues that each country is facing, because they're not the same in every country. Now, business needs to know this because business operates in those countries, and they need to know what are the big issues that the country is facing, and how are they going to help or hinder progress on those issues. So government can look at those things, as should business, to set policy. Hopefully policy which will improve society and hopefully protect or improve the environment. On the flip side, you've got business. Now, we've heard a lot about business and strategy, and I thought it was great what we did yesterday with Michael Porter to take a step back to how do corporates think about strategy. Right, so corporates think about strategy to try and make a profit. They measure performance. That's what corporates do. They measure things to see if they are improving year on year, week by week, month on month. And I think this goes partly to the issue of the short-termism. They also need to measure other things. We do something called measuring total impact, measuring the total impact that a corporate has on society across environmental, social, economic, and fiscal. And it's not a short-term measure, it's a long-term measure, and it's outside of their own boundaries. It's the total impact of everything they do across the entire life cycle of their organization. When you sort of measure those things and you understand the impact your business is having on society, you can set strategy in such a way that you can improve the impact on society as well as making a profit. So shared value sits absolutely in that strategy intervention box. How do I do things which both improve society and improve my own profitability? But there's another thing which Michael Porter referred to, I just jotted it down, as external constraints. And actually Kathleen just referred to something called systems we rely on. We call it dependency, because business, surprise it or not, is very dependent on society for its entire being. It's dependent on society for its employees, for its customers, for the natural capital that it uses and takes. So business also needs to understand how it depends on society in different ways. All those two things look wonderful like that, but then of course there's this thing we've also been talking about, and I should say in strategy intervention, by the way, a key strategy here is of course the third sector. How does the business engage with the third sector in its strategies about delivering its impacts? But there's then this fantastic bit about how does business interact with government? Because government policy also affects business. Sometimes in weird and wonderful ways that weren't quite intended, sometimes in weird and wonderful ways that were intended. So there also needs to be a constant dialogue between business and government to make sure that policy actually is congruent with what business is trying to do, because otherwise you won't get the sweet spot of everybody working to improve that society. That is a very simple, high-level, 100,000-foot view of how we see the role of where business is in society. And what you'll notice, those orange boxes are things you can measure. Those are indicators, they are data points that people in business like. Because when you can measure things, you can start to make decisions. You can start to understand trade-offs. Michael Porter talked about trade-offs yesterday. Trade-offs are sort of things where you need to make a decision between two different decisions you've got. When they are qualitative, it's very difficult. Do I train more people, or do I save a litre of water? I can only do one of the two. Which do I do? That's quite difficult to do unless you have a way of measuring them and being able to trade them off, which is what that whole total impact thing does. But there you go. There's a simple system for thinking about the role of business in society. How do I create that shared value? And do I understand all the moving parts? I will just tell one story. I was with a bank from a country which will remain nameless that was operating in another country, and they had a single policy for what they called responsible banking across the entire banking, the whole of that company. And I challenged them on that. I said, surely you need to understand what are the issues that the country is facing that makes you a responsible bank in that country. And it won't be the same in every country. And a little light bulb went on, because the role of a bank in society is actually to finance the things that need to be fixed. That's one of the roles of a bank. So they need to understand what needs to be fixed before they can actually say what is a responsible bank in that country. Right, we're going to go to the poll. The poll is around the 4 lab sessions we have coming up. The first question is this. This is the one around innovation. To what extent does your organisation use societal needs as a source of innovation today? And I'm literally going to give you a few minutes because I have only a few minutes left. So here we have, to some extent, not at all is 0, which is quite a nice thing to see, I suppose. Exclusively 5%, going up to 6%. So I think that's probably what we would have expected to some extent or a great extent. Using societal needs. Of course, we'd like to see it being not exclusively, but probably maybe more to a great extent. Thank you. The second question is around brands. To what extent do you see consumer or customer expectations today connecting your brand to addressing societal needs? I think this is quite interesting when you think about that dependency issue, because of course your brand is dependent on your consumer, and your consumer actually liking your product and wanting your product and paying for your product. So it's interesting to see this is starting to move from, to some extent, to a great extent. I would say as we move to the millennials becoming more the major purchaser of most products and services, I think this is going to become far more important that we see brand being totally linked to societal need. The third one, to what extent do you see employee engagement in your organisation today building shared values, skills and leadership? Again, you think about that dependency I was talking about. You are entirely dependent on your workforce. And your workforce, there's every academic bit of literature you could look for to show how engaged employees are more productive employees, more loyal employees, and therefore actually they're better for your business. I'm surprised to see not at all there for some people, but that's interesting. And I think we probably expect those other two. These, of course, these polls stay open for a bit longer, and the SVI will be taking these and using these down the track, so do keep answering. And finally, My favorite one, what data do you use internally today to understand and evaluate your shared value activities? Interesting to see social outcomes down at 12%, social outputs at 28%. That's the big thing that we're working on right now, is how do we move from output to outcome, because outcome's what we're really after. I'd agree with what Darren said, that in the world of philanthropy, there are some things that you cannot measure, but I heard a wonderful thing, don't let complexity be replaced with complacency. There is an awful lot of stuff that you can measure if you really want to. And business needs to really think about how they measure more, so they can't hide behind the excuse it's too complex. So social outputs interesting, business outputs, I'm not surprised to see that. I'm interested to see social outputs higher than business outputs. What we'd really like to see is that moving towards the right, towards social outcomes and value created. Okay, we are now going to break for our lab sessions. They were due to start at 11. I don't know if that's still the case. Just so you know, I think you've all signed up for a lab session. The Innovations lab session will be in here. The other 3 will be downstairs. The brands one will be in Studio 3 and 4. The employee engagement will be in Studio 6. And the measurement one will be in the West Ballroom downstairs. And if you're coming there, I'll see you downstairs, because we're working on that one as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please kindly make your way to your respective breakout sessions. There are breaks and snacks available. We'll be reconvening promptly at 2 p.m. for our afternoon session in the Gallery Ballroom. Once again, we'll be starting at 2 p.m. promptly.